Very good morning to one and all present here. Welcoming here Dr. Deepti Ganapathy, a faculty member at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, and a former journalist who has widely covered and reported on infrastructure, health, women issues, education, and environment. She holds a PhD in communication and journalism from the University of Mysore. She has received recognition for her work, including Journalist of the Month, February 2017, International Journalist Network, and was a finalist for CNN Youth Journalist Award in 2007, among others. She was appointed as a visiting scholar at the University of California, San Diego, 2019. She was a Rotary GSC Fellow in 2009 to New Zealand. She has presented her work at many leading international conferences and has delivered academic talks to government and also to business organizations. She has published more than 1,000 articles across academic journals, book chapters, and mainstream media. She taught leadership articles and also offered guest blogs, continued to appear in many popular newspapers, to name a few: Deccan Herald, Times of India, Indian Express, and Economic Times. Dr. Deepti Ganapathy has 17 years of practitioner and academic experience with India's leading media and education conglomerates. They are Times of India, Deccan Herald, NDTV, IIM Indore, and School of Business for Management, NMIMS University. At IIM Bangalore, she teaches communication course for MBA program and also offers several executive education courses. She has been the program director for various custom and short duration program and offer many open programs for sustainability and communication. Her massive open online course on health communication was launched during the pandemic for healthcare professionals by IIM Bangalore's digital initiative. She has been invited by WHO Infodemic Management in building the curriculum for infodemic management in education program. Her research work has been published in leading management journals such as Academy of Management Learning and Education, as well as in many highly ranked communication journals such as Journalism. She contributed the book chapters in the book, edited by renowned scholars globally and published by Sage and Emerald on social media and measurement and computer mediated communication. She is an author of the recently published book, Media and Climate Change: Making Sense of Press Narratives, which explores the socio-economic and cultural understanding of climate issues and influence of environment communication via the news and public responses to it. Her book is well received globally, and she has been invited as a plenary speaker at prominent climate conference and as a speaker to various research centers in universities in the US and EU, doing work around the themes of sustainability and climate change communication. Her book was listed in the Honor Book List 2022 in the business category in Green Literature Festival. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am, today morning.
Thank
Over.
you, Dr. Nabanita Ghosh and Professor Dinesh Kumar. Lovely to be speaking to an audience at Christ University, to a diverse audience really at Christ University, where there are so many interdisciplinary schools. And that's what the topic for today's talk is also about. Media and climate change, communicating for climate action. The reason I bring this up is because of the multidisciplinary nature of this topic. It is of interest to a wide range of disciplines, a wide range of audience. And I hope by the end of my talk, I will be able to communicate with great clarity about not only the importance of this special topic that we are talking about today, but also how critical communication becomes in this process of enabling the various stakeholders to work towards climate mitigation and climate action and work towards real solutions for our planet. And the interesting thing about this topic is that it is appealing to various stakeholder groups, whether it is young adults, who constitute the majority population of our country, or whether it is policy makers, whether it is business leaders, whether it is entrepreneurs. This topic is of appeal to a various, kind of audience, and that's what's interesting about today's talk too. So let me start my presentation by talking a little bit about why the book is doing so well globally. It is currently stocked in about 180 libraries worldwide. I think I forgot to update you on this aspect that I've been recently appointed as an affiliate faculty at the Center for Climate Change Communication, which is in George Mason University in Virginia in the United States. Where I spent, the summer doing research on climate change and its impact on health, which is a long-term study that I'm doing in India, in the United States, and in China. And what really got the book going in all these different libraries across the world is the accessible nature of the writing, which makes this book relevant to a variety of stakeholders, like I said earlier. And so this is Rishikesh, a three-time Grammy Award winner, who has written a praise for my book and who was also invited to launch the book, the South Asian edition of the book here at IIM Bangalore. And why it's interesting to get a perspective from somebody like him is because today the music industry is and the entertainment industry is increasingly talking about climate change and increasingly working towards making global audiences understand the challenges of climate change. And that's why it's interesting to have that connect in the communication between musicians, entertainers, to the popular through the popular media to the different stakeholders. And the idea actually for this book came because I used to work as a full-time journalist, and that was when I realized how difficult it is to report about environment communication and the challenges that the media faces in publicizing a story when politics and crime dominate the media scenario. And when I became an academician, I took an academic interest in this topic, looked at it from a policy perspective, looked at it from the communication perspective and the media framing perspective on what could be done. So that was the way in which I kind of was able to triangulate the data, and I'll present that later in my talk. Another interesting praise for the book came from, so while one stakeholder or one praise from the book came from a popular celebrity, another one came from a very renowned professor at the Ross School of Business, the University of Michigan. He's Professor Andrew Hoffman, who he's done a lot of work in the space of sustainability. And he interestingly brought out this aspect of the Western Ghats being home to around 50 million people. And so when there is this question about, why should we talking only about the Western Ghats, it's again this element of how do we frame the context? How do we make sure that we make every stakeholder understand that climate change is for real? And climate change is something that we talked about for many decades. Now it's happening, but we have to talk about the next aspect, which is climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and action. And so he said that because the Western Ghats is home to around 50 million people, not only are the communities nestled in that ecosystem, their voices are also necessary for it, but also because it's one of the hottest hotspots for biological diversity. Also, there are varied economic interests. There are hydropower projects. We need to get our economy running too. So we have to stay invested in such a biodiversity hotspot. So how do we juggle this or balance this aspect of progress and conservation efforts? And that's why the Western Ghats is very typical. Media prominently features the Amazon forest, because that becomes a frame of reference for us, because that's one of the thickest forests globally. right? So when there are fires in the Amazon, or when the different South American countries are fighting over the territorial aspect of the Amazon forest cover, and how to bring in policies to conserve it, that catches a lot of media attention. Similarly, the Western Ghats is India's rainforest, is what I have kind of reference to, and kind of frame it in that context, so that it becomes easier for the communication to kind of propagate and get disseminated. So, like I mentioned earlier, the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication is where I'm an affiliate researcher. And my next research project is on how climate change has impact on health, and how the media in China, India, and the US has been covering it for the last decade. And why it's interesting to talk about it now, because at the COP28, which will take place in Dubai in December, the COP summit is for the first time in history going to be having one day dedicated to health, because of the implications that health can have for all of us. So that's when we are going to be also looking at a surge in media reporting, and that's why it's interesting to do this research in these times. The book, or the way in which the book has also been received was the impact that it saw in the media. And why it's interesting to talk about it is sometimes the book can be critical about the media not covering enough, right? And so why should the media even cover a coverage of the book being launched? That itself is a kind of a change that we can see today in media coverage, because the media has unanimously understood its implications as the voice of the voiceless, maybe the voice of the climate, the environment, and it has decided to give it the attention it deserves. And so it was interesting, therefore, to see that kind of a coverage also when the book was launched. And of course, the various institutes that I am affiliated with, like the East West Center, where I'm an alumni, and a couple of newsletters and organizations where I have affiliation, have also talked about the book or put it up in their newsletter. The book basically explores the socio-economic and cultural understanding of climate issues and the influence of environment communication via the news and the public response to it. Now, I'd like to pause a bit here and pick up on that thread on why it is important to understand climate change through this lens, of the news media and the public response to it. Because when we talk about communication as a process, there is always, the sender, then there is the message, then there is a disturbance in that message, there's a lot of interference, then that message could be conveyed through different media, through different channels. And then at the end there is this receiver, and that receiver may have different communication receiving capabilities in terms of understanding of the framing, understanding of the tone, understanding of how does it matter to me, understanding of, why should I even be reading this issue or the story and this article, and something that's happening in the Arctic. For instance, polar bears disappearing or becoming extinct, or a glacier melting there in Alaska, or the river in floods somewhere in the Himalayas. How is it going to affect me sitting in another place or in another country? And why should I even be, kind of interacting with this kind of a story becomes critical. And there the communication process is interesting, because at the end of the day, the public should be able to respond to that news. And when I say respond, the news item should be such that the communities should be taking interest in it, because it may be something that's going to be affecting them. The community should be taking notice of it and saying, if it's happening in this country or in a different state or in a different district, it's likely that such a thing may affect us too next time or next season, or the next bout of rains may have the same implications. So how did that community respond to it? What kind of policy measures were in place? And let's therefore look at that closely and see how we can be better prepared for a consequence like that. And that's where public response is critical. And when we talk about the communication process again, unless the receiver understands what the sender is sending in a language, in a tone, in the rhetorical devices that the receiver is used to receiving the message in, unless that happens, he or she or the communities may not respond to it at all. And if they are not responding to it, then it becomes even more critical, because the effect in terms of the crisis, in terms of the drought, in terms of the excessive rainfall, could have sudden implications. It's an uncertainty, right? It's a risk situation. So when that happens, then there should be a way in which they are able to cope with it, that they are able to understand what's happening around them. And therefore, a sustained and a concerted effort by the media is important to bring in that clarity, that consistency in the communication process, so that the public is able to respond to it with greater clarity. So going back to how climate change was communicated in early times, it was mostly the pure scientists, right, who were doing, or the physicists or the oceanographers who were studying about climate change deep in the oceans, above in the clouds or in the forests, who were able to understand that climate change is happening, or studying glaciers, who are able to understand that it's happening. But inevitably, their research was being confined to journals which a very selected set of people read. And so it didn't have larger implications for the world, for global leaders to take policy decisions and to make sure that concerted climate action takes place. But the last 2-3 years has changed that. In fact, just before my book was even released, I got invited to the country's leading theoretical sciences or pure sciences institute that was hosting a huge climate conclave, and I was asked to talk there. And interestingly, most of the scientists who were in that panel, kind of reiterated the fact how important communication is, because no matter what scientists are saying, no matter what policy analysts are saying, and no matter what's happening on the ground, if these three things are not connected well by a clear and continuous communication system, then there is no way in which we can come up with climate action or climate solutions. And therefore, what I have tried to do in the book is I've tried to examine the position of the media as a facilitator between scientists, between policymakers, and the public. And how I have done this is by using the case study of the Western Ghats, by interviewing communities, forest-dwelling communities in the Western Ghats, and by doing a comparative analysis of two leading national newspapers, the Times of India and the Deccan Herald, who covered about the topic extensively for about 5 years. So I looked at a 5-year coverage of how they had specifically looked at environmental news, and that's how I went about designing the study. And why does media coverage even matter? Drawing on what I said earlier, because the media sets the agenda, the way in which the media frames an issue becomes very interesting. And this agenda setting and this framing ultimately gives direction for public policy. I was invited as an expert for a stakeholder meeting on, scaling up climate education in high schools. By the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, UNICEF, and the government of Karnataka. And what these stakeholder meetings interestingly brought up is that the curriculum in schools need to be changed, because especially in places like which are going to be affected by climate change, the arid regions where climate change is definitely being seen as a potential threat. So how do we incorporate, the scaling up of climate education in schools to prepare our youngsters to deal with this, but to also give them the necessary, adaptation tools and resilience to find solutions and look and seek jobs which can, help mitigate climate change, right? And so in those stakeholder meetings, it emerged, and I'll also kind of share that with you during the Q&A later, how different stakeholders think about it, how they perceive it, but also how important it becomes for educators like us to disseminate this information through a curriculum based approach. And therefore it's also critical to understand that students, and the families that they come from are also discussing what's happening or what's being reported in the media. They are also watching, they are consumers of news, they are watching television, they are being fed with a number of social media streams. They are aware of what's happening outside, even if it's not taught in the curriculum, right? So they are aware of the scenarios that climate change is bringing about in different countries, and that awareness needs to be streamlined into a curriculum based approach so that our education system is strengthened, for helping our young people to cope with something that they have inherited, unfortunately. And so that's why the media, coverage becomes important to perceive, because public opinion and matters, and how we map what people know also matters. So, for instance, what this means is that at the urban level, our audience is different. So the city edition of a newspaper can publish news, or can publish, solutions to some climate action, because they know that their audience has a level of understanding that is a little higher than someone in the rural area. Whereas somebody in the rural area can be, taught, or it can be explained to them in a much more nuanced manner, because of the fact that they haven't yet figured out what's happening or what's going to be happening to them. So when I was invited by All India Radio to give a talk in Kannada, the local language, I kind of broke it down into very nuanced or relatable or hyper local aspects for their listeners. And interestingly, they got very nice feedback from remote corners of the state, talking about the perceptions that that public like to engage with. So therefore, feedback in the communication process, feedback also becomes very critical. How does my audience understand what I'm saying? If this is how the feedback is coming, that means there is something that I need to do about my content, something that I need to change about my coverage. The level of understanding is high, or the level of understanding is mediocre. So this is how I need to change the way in which I'm going to cover it or talk about it. And that becomes interesting for the media to also adapt going forward. Because public perception, such as attitudes, their behavior, and how they influence, for the communities, become major factors for a sustainable outlook. For instance, if a community feels strongly about conserving a local lake, and increasing the biodiversity there, making sure that there are more birds coming there, there is more, kind of vigilance that an industry which is nearby should not be leaving effluents into the water. There should not be pollution from other sources into the water. So if a community is very aware and has an influencing outlook, then it becomes very easy to change the attitude and the behavior of people around, and have a pocket of kind of a climate solution to that area. So the media should also highlight those kind of success stories. The media should also focus on such kind of stories and kind of bring out the voices of those communities, so that it could influence or motivate other communities to say, oh, here's a community that did something on their own without any political interference, or who stood up to the big corporate giants, and they were able to do this, and this is the impact that it has had on the ecosystem. So why can't we do it? So this kind of public perception should also be captured adequately by the media, and that's why media coverage matters. That's why how the media talks about climate change matters. So here's an interesting, clip that I wanted to share, and this is something that the Times of India, kind of highlighted in 2018. And interestingly, I want to show this, and then I want to show you the next, topic about what the judicial system today. Increasingly, the judiciary is taking cognizance of these matters and giving a rap to whether it is the government or the corporates to buckle up and take cognizance of it. So for instance, in the United States, and I'll talk about that later, it came to the notice of one of the candidates who was canvassing, and in elections a lot is being discussed today, when, so for instance, there's this interesting fact that came up recently, that when Joe Biden ran for president in 2020, he called for restricting oil and gas drilling on federal lands. But as president, he has reversed or qualified key climate promises, even as the US remains far from meeting their emission targets. So why did he do this? Because he said, if he doesn't do this, then the judiciary will anyway, kind of come in, and they'll have to fight the matter out in court. So sometimes it becomes this tangle between the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive on how to deal with this situation. And on the other hand, we also need to be looking clearly at the ecosystem and looking out for those telltale signs, such as the one on the screen on your right, which says the bees feel the sting of climate change, because the bees are some of the most delicate living beings in our ecosystem, and they are so delicate, they're so fragile that they cannot survive if there is some disruption in the normal ecosystem. So they become good indicators of climate change in a region. Right? And this is what I was talking about, that the forest communities living in the Western Ghats. This is one focus group discussion that I conducted with them on how they should be perceiving climate change. What has been the differences that they perceive, the different generations, the old lady to her grandson or her granddaughter, how different has it been? The call of the fox, or the produce that is available in the forest, how it is diminishing and how it affects their livelihood. All these themes came out during the focus group discussion with these tribals who are living on the fringes of the forest. Why they're living on the fringes of the forest? Because of the forest being declared as an eco-sensitive area. They cannot live inside the forest. They cannot take out as much produce as they would take out to sustain themselves. So they have been given housing just outside the forest so that they can continue. And so this is that, that conundrum that I was talking about, man-animal conflict, conflict between societies when it comes to climate change. So this is an excerpt that they brought out during the discussion. We used to go into the forest and pick products out of which we made brooms and sold produce such as soap nut, dhoop, which we used as incense sticks, amla and honey. With the implementation of Forest Rights Act, we have a limit to the number of products we can pick up. So we are regularly harassed whenever we venture into the forest, and false allegations are made. While at the same time, it's also true that the forest guards or the forest department is also vigilant. They are protecting our forests from wildfires. They're protecting our forests from poaching. They're increasing the wildlife in our forests. So there is this always there is this backlash that one faces, and therefore we need to read through the print and read between the lines carefully whatever the media is projecting, while also trying to understand what's happening at the ground level. And so communities, when they report on climate change, they had a different way of perceiving the change and how they responded to it. For instance, I'll just pick up one example from here. When we talk about the onset of monsoon, how it has, the perceived changes, it is unpredictable. What it has led to watershed management, it has led to building of tanks. So this is the way, I was talking about resilience, adaptation, solutions, this is the way the community should respond to a climate change, understanding how it has implications for them and what they need to do in terms of coping or adapting to that change. So the macrocosm for me became the Western Ghats. I looked at Deccan Herald, Times of India, and this is how the articles that I referred to featured. For instance, in one of the newspapers, the news reports were high. One of them, they were low. Featured articles were high. Featured articles were low. Editorials were very low. Analytical essays were quite low. So what this means is that the media is merely reporting about climate change, rather than what they should be doing is bringing out more investigative pieces, more analytical pieces, and editorials should be quite, it should be quite, it should stress more on the implications of environmental communication. So I'll just come to the next slide, which is what I wanted to also talk about, the increase in visual coverage. So over the period of time, we've seen that our audiences like to engage on social media. So the kind of coverage has also changed from what we analyzed in traditional newspapers. Today, you have a lot of analytical data and a lot of graphical representation of this. Our communities or our audiences like to engage in or feel it. You have heat maps. You can feel how your city is going to look in the next summer. You can experience it. That kind of an experiential way of communication is also being kind of leveraged. Why media coverage matters, we discussed about that, but I wanted to kind of pause on this slide a bit and say that, today, August 30th, 2023, is when I picked up this news article. It says climate change is here to stay. The Indian media reports on its complexity better than the West. And I think that's something that's a huge, huge, pat on our backs that we should be giving, because from when I started doing my research in 2012, almost 10 years now, we are in 2023. If this is the kind of story that the headline is screaming, that means we've come a long way, better than the West, in terms of reporting on its complexity, because that is the essence of the communication aspect of climate change. It is very complex. It is very, very complex to make it understandable to different segments of audience, different types of audience. And that's where I would like to pause, so that we can, take this conversation forward with a Q&A, so that we can discuss more aspects from the kind of questions that both of you may have for me. Thank you.
All right, ma'am. It's very interesting to listen from you on various aspects that you have covered. In fact, in the news, in a book, and also All India Radio, etc. So you're trying to create a ripple effect through your voices, through communication. So first of all, congratulations, and pleasure to have you with us. So I have a few questions which might not be directly from the book. However, it is going to be in general, more fully in terms of common man's question to you. So in this digital era, you see people consume more information online, for example, mobile, laptop, or computer devices, right? So which in fact modifies the way we think and act and respond in many aspects, including the way we wear a cloth or way we believe, etc. In such a scenario, what would be the strategy to infuse climate change knowledge to everyone, and especially the digital user? And who can do it? And what are the practical ways?
Very interesting question, Professor Dinesh. Thank you for that question. And it is true that people consume information in different ways, and they like to get that information in a way in which they are comfortable with it. So, for instance, I showed you on the presentation earlier that infographics, right, or that the way in which the visualization of the data takes place. So, some of us may like to engage with the data like that in the form of heat maps or in the form of experiential way, while some of us may like to read an 800-word article, or some of us may like to see a video, like just a YouTube kind of a shorts video, or an Instagram reel. And that is the way in which we like to consume information, right? And so therefore, so when I'll first talk about what kind of problems the government may be facing, and then I'll talk about the consumer aspect, because you asked about, sustainability in fashion, sustainability in the way we want to be entertained, whether we want to play a sport because that sport kind of consumes more water, or we want to be mindful about that in terms of the preferences that we have, ecotourism, things like that. So during my conversations with people in the government, it has come to my notice, and that the government also faces a lot of problems in explaining about climate change and its impact to various stakeholders, because every ministry, whether it is Ministry of Urban Affairs, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, every ministry has today a policy that takes care of the climate change aspect. But that interlinkage is not coming across very clearly, because that's a communication problem. But however, if you want to build a house, or if you want to apply for a loan, everywhere you have to show the aspect that you're caring for the environment, that you are putting in place a way in which you are going to be conserving resources, right? Whether a company is going for a loan or an entrepreneur is seeking funding. So because each one of these stakeholders have their own understanding and perspective about it. So therefore, for instance, I was just looking at a chart where it mentions that, there are ways in which retailers kind of want to give an edge to their stakeholders, and think about making green promises. So we talk about this, a lot of literature on greenwashing, or green hushing, right? So how can companies portray that they are mindful about consumer preferences, mindful about showcasing the traces of the supply chain, where each aspect of their produce is coming from, and they want to be seen as a business that is sustainable in every sense, because they want their values to align with the personal values of their consumers, whether it is when they are buying a piece of clothing, or a water bottle, a plastic water bottle, or a drink, a mango drink. When that person is buying a mango drink, he or she is looking at, okay, how has this company even invested in farmers who are growing mangoes in this state in India, and how have they shown their interest towards sustainability and farming. So companies today are very mindful about this. Organizations are very mindful about this, and that's also something that for instance. The digital media has to understand in the way in which people communicate or engage with them. So when you talk about what kind of a strategy is necessary to infuse climate change knowledge to everyone, it depends on, like I said earlier, it depends on what level of understanding do they already have, and what is in it for them, and what is the stake that they have in it. So the more stake they have in it, the more likely they are to engage with you. And that's the way in which each organization should be thinking about the communication strategy while building climate knowledge for everyone.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, ma'am. It's a wonderful presentation, and we had been listening to you. So, if I look at your presentation, because I was listening to some of your earlier talks in some of the other areas, I would just like to ask you this Western Ghat, which is your core theme with which you started off, as it is a shelter for so many people. So now, do you think in the next few years to come, because the sensitization drive has to go on, and with the media house, it can be much more penetrated into the system, which area would be further more prone to these malefics of climate change, and we need to start off with it. Might be your next book can come out with something other than Western Ghats. Which is that in your mind you like to share with us?
That's a fantastic question because I was in Hawaii last year, and I was invited to talk about the reframing of the climate conversations or the narrative. And interestingly, Hawaii was facing an existential crisis, or for Pacific islands, very small Pacific islands in that region. Climate change is an existential crisis. They, seawater is rising. Their identity is at stake. But when I say identity, the sovereignty, they belong to certain nations, so they lose identity and they become climate refugees. And they refuse to want to be climate refugees because they say we have territorial waters, we earn our economies survive because of that. So the narrative was very unique, very different from what we were discussing about in the Western Ghats to Hawaii. And interestingly, Hawaii is today, it's facing, unfortunately, a deluge of climate catastrophes after catastrophes, because of the unique placement that it has, or because of different factors which one cannot even imagine. So Western Ghats, like I said, is just that framing of that narrative. For me, it started there because, and why that's interesting is also because it passes through around 6 to 7 states on the Western Peninsula. And all these states are quite high in terms of GDP, right? Maharashtra, Karnataka, and most of their resources come from mining activity, hydropower projects in the Western Ghats. They are very, very rich ecosystems. And not only that, it's also a habitable place, right? Like people live there. And it's not like a remote region in the Himalayas where the population is very thin. It is very thickly populated. It is accessible. Roads are made. Train network is good, which brings in a lot of revenue, a lot of economic activity. So therefore, the media coverage around this issue surged. That's why my book primarily focused on that, because the media coverage surged around that issue because it was so much concerning these different stakeholders. So any other region, maybe if it is like the middle of our country, whether it is Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, even those are very biodiverse, and very different kind of terrain. But it is thinly populated. There is, the migration is happening from those places into the cities. So the media doesn't feel that it is necessary to report, though there may be a lot of important issues taking place there. It doesn't come under the radar of the media. Why? Because they are not my audience. I don't get my revenue from them. There is no important editions or news editions coming out from there. So unless it is a catastrophe, disaster, unless there is a crime committed there, unless a top leader goes and visits there, it doesn't deserve that kind of attention. It may have the same implications that the Western Ghat is having, but because people are not involved there, or people in the high visibility spectrum are not at stake there, therefore media coverage doesn't surge in those areas. So it's not that I'm focusing on Western Ghats just because it is a macrocosm, but also because of these reasons. And that again goes back to what I was talking about in terms of communication balance, in terms of how the audience's implications are higher, how it results in greater communication aspects for different types of audience. Stakeholders' engagement is very high, and that's the reason why. So therefore, when we talk about like I said, Hawaii and different regions around the world, it's right now there are a lot of rains, havoc happening in South China, Hong Kong. So these kind of extreme weather events are getting reported, quite regularly. So we cannot really predict which is going to be the region which is going to see widespread devastation, because it's happening in equal measure in different parts of the world. And that's why I think even in the recent G20 summit, the clarion call was to bring in this disaster risk mitigation as well, and be able to help people from different regions, different kind of communities, while staying connected through this common problem that all nations are facing today.
Okay, I think, ma'am, some of your aspects of the question which Nabanita ma'am asked, you have answered. However, still in my mind, you see a common man, say a farmer. No, he's in the rural part of the country where you tried addressing through All India Radio. However, if you see the groundwater depletion or rain is less, maybe due to the climate change, that farmer or any of the primary producer is not aware. How do you think media can actually go and educate or make them aware about this? But you mentioned that media is not doing it in a much sense. As a common man, if media is not doing, as a common man, as an academician, how do we do that?
Yeah, that's is so important, because I think it also has implications on the food that we get on our dining table, right? And climate change is going to have an impact on food. It's going to have, in fact, going back to my Hawaii example, we had this, and I'll just present that slide before we move forward. It's so interesting to when we look at that perspective, it's so interesting because we talked about this aspect of food, and in Hawaii, when I was there for that conference, this is the board that struck out to me when we were having lunch. Due to the current disruptions in the supply chain, we are experiencing frequent menu changes and substitutions for ingredients that may cause changes to the allergens in some of your favorite food items. So this was at the University of Hawaii Manoa's campus. What this means is that, like you talked about farmers, right? When there is a extreme climate event, or when the food that was supposed to reach a particular place doesn't reach, again, we talk about supply chain disruptions here, then it affects what we've been consuming as food. We may be used to a particular kind of fruit, or we may have dietary preferences, dietary restrictions. Senior citizens, children, these are vulnerable groups, and they may have a particular milk produce, or they may have a particular cereal that they consume. And if the agricultural sector is not able to cope, or if there is a disruption in supply chain, each of these ingredients or each of this food item can cause implications on health, and that is what we are also discussing in my next research project, climate change and its implications on health. So while this is interesting, while this is going to be taking shape in different ways, it's also interesting to see how different governments are kind of coping with it. For instance, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution declaring 2023 as the International Year of Millets, as they can be cultivated across diverse agroecological regions and are resistant to pests and diseases, because millets can grow in adverse and arid conditions with comparatively fewer inputs as compared to other cereals. So they play an important role in addressing climate change, food security issues. And when you talk about the media coverage, recently I read a report in the Deccan Herald that the University of Agricultural Sciences in Dharwad had reported that new drought-resistant varieties of crops will be showcased in the Krishi Mela in 2023. And they have come out with 24 new varieties of crops, including wheat, sweet corn, cotton, and sugarcane, which will be resistant to drought, salinity, and pests. And they can come to the aid of the distressed farmers. So when these kind of melas or sammelans take place, it becomes interesting to see that how the media should be covering about this. But there is already a network like All India Radio. There is already a network in that exists through the public broadcasting channels like Doordarshan and All India Radio for our farmers. Every morning they get an advisory about the weather conditions, soil conditions. I remember when I was working in the media, the local agricultural institute in that region, they would send an advisory on what kind of crops you should be planting because the rainfall is like this. So, but then, again, the problem is that is the media actually having the space to put out that advisory? Or they think, okay, there's no space, let me put it into just 2 lines. Instead of giving it a half-page coverage, instead of giving it a good placement so that the farmer or the required stakeholder can read it. But as you and me, what can we do is, the food preferences, food habits. How can we think about it in a more sustained way? How can we think about going back to our roots and traditional farming practices, and seeing that we kind of encourage our local growers, go to the local markets and buy fresh produce from there, instead of craving for something that requires a lot of time and effort and money to bring in from some other country, and store it in conditions which require more energy, and then consume it. If we can think about our own food preferences, it can have a natural implication on the farmer in our region as well. That's my point of view.
Okay, very nice. Thank you, ma'am.
Just one point I was just thinking of, like today we are living in a democratic country. I mean, we had been living. Now in our country, it's like economics is dominated by politics, that we all know. Now the question is, we need a sensitization drive for this climate change. So how do you feel, ma'am, this climate change will influence the politics? Because climate change is now influencing every segment, be it a finance, be it in any other segment. So if at all, it needs to be an influential factor for the politics, and that too, it should not be detrimental to the interest of the society. How do you feel that drive can be taken forward?
Yes, that's a very, very, defining question, I think, of our times. And if you look at how elections have been fought in the United States or in any other developed country in the world, I think the climate issue has come up, but it has also become, kind of pro anti religion based, and not scientific based. It's become something of a way in which to polarize opinions. But with the world experiencing the effects or the jarring effects of climate change, I think more and more people, and scientists and policymakers and politicians are becoming increasingly aware that framing the climate change simply as an environmental issue and allowing the public to treat it separately from society, politics, and culture is not the way. So we need to move away from a kind of a traditional information deficit model and communicate the climate crisis in a more effective and engaging manner. And interestingly, conferences to political communication conferences too are inviting not only communication scholars like us, but they are also inviting politicians. And there you can see the stark contrast when they present, and how certain politicians will just blame another country and say they are emitting 30% of the world's carbon emissions. So why are we even discussing about it? They refuse to talk about it. And some other country, a neighboring country, somebody said from that country that if you are such an influential leader in our region, in the Pacific region, if you are talking like this, then what about small countries like us? So there's a trickle down effect, right? Each one is trying to blame the other. But if countries realize that we are all sharing the same environment, and they should stop playing politics here, but also look at the interlinkages, whether it is the economic aspect, or the health aspect of it. We all are just coming out of one of the biggest pandemics of our times, and we all saw how important it becomes to have interlinkages between countries, between policy, and come across as being united in this fight against it. If we can, continue in that same momentum and share a common resolve to finding climate solutions. It's not just blaming each other and putting the onus on another country or a developed country on it, because developing countries or Asian continent is going to be facing the brunt of climate change. So we need to kind of go to the table with a very, very dominating perspective, and influence everyone to be able to see it from our perspective, to shape a better policy direction towards climate action.
Oh, it's very interesting to know that, ma'am. You also mentioned that you've been invited by government of Karnataka for the talk of adding syllabus into the schools.
Yeah.
However, if you see current climate changes due to pollution and carbon emission, etc., do you think that the majority contributors like the industrialization, meaning to say that the engineering courses. Do you think that a mandatory syllabus have to be given to them, and how can we add certain subjects of climate change into the business and management subject also? And why do you think so?
Very interesting question again, because today, if your university or your particular institute wants to be seen as a global leader in the education field, they have to vie for or compete for these rankings, right? So many of these ranking agencies, they definitely ask one parameter, which is what are you doing in your syllabus or in your curriculum towards economic, creating impact, knowledge, and showing responsibility amongst your graduating students. And therefore, you have to map that. When you're showing it in your vision and mission statement, your educational institution has to map that towards showing that you are cognizant of sustainability and how it needs to be communicated. And you have to show that impact also. It's not just necessary to show it as something that you intend to do, but if you are going to introduce more courses, then what kind of an impact are you being able to showcase on the field? And in terms of, so for instance, today there are platforms specifically posting job opportunities for environmental job seekers to connect with employers who prioritize the well-being of the environment, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workspace. And according to a recent report, after job losses during COVID-19 pandemic, climate change was on top of job seekers' minds. So increasingly, our younger generation is also very mindful about this practice, and they are also seeking jobs that can help them to show this aspect of being concerned or caring about the environment. So inevitably, institutions also have to start including a lot of elements of this in their curriculum, because it's something that, like I said, it's reflecting in the outside world. So you can't be teaching something different inside the classroom. Your students will definitely ask you these questions in the classroom.
I I also have a follow-up question when you said that. Now, see, ma'am, now UN is urging, and also UGC has provided guidelines on climate change and SDG goals. So, with this respect, if you see, university have their academic goals very different, right, ma'am? And also, it is not practically possible to provide more focus for the climate change, etc., because academic and research goals comes in. Now, what is your thought on this? How can we add, already existing academic goals and also existing research goals?
The right fit for this would be to bring in more interlinkages, and that's why the multidisciplinary nature of this topic is also interesting. For instance, an economist will definitely be interested in showcasing how climate change has implications on a particular monetary policy. And so also a person who is pursuing chemistry or some theoretical sciences. So every field is inevitably going to look at the interlinkages to what is happening in real time. And so it's interesting to therefore go in for more collaborative effort in terms of your research. Social sciences, pure sciences, you need to find interlinkages there. And when it comes to your syllabus and curriculum, you need to also think a little bit out of the box in terms of making your students ready for the outside world, right? Ready for jobs that require them to have an understanding about this. So some element of it, even if it is 10% initially, is important to bring in. It could happen just by having a reading of news coverage about this issue in the classroom and linking it to your subject. Just bring in, encourage your children or your students to read a newspaper article or listen to a podcast about sustainability, about climate change, or about adaptation and mitigation goals, and link it to some concept that you are talking about in class. It could be a conceptual understanding of something that is being discussed, but you can add an element of this newspaper reading that they have, so that could encourage conversations, and that will definitely lead to even in your projects, even in the assignments that you give students, you can definitely make them incorporate more of showing how they are going to be adapting to climate resilience.
As you were telling about reading the newspaper, I was reading the newspaper yesterday morning along with my son. That is the for the kids, the young Hindu newspaper. So I
Yes.
was reading because of these climate change, even the cows are also having a problem. There is a particular species of cows who will be completely going to a different state.
Hmm.
Now the concern comes to us. If there would be no cows in future, there would be no milk at all, so there will be a calcium deficit and the brittle bone disease will be at a greater state. Now, should you suggest any kind of substitution of the food in order to combat with the climate change? Because not only cows, I feel there are so many species which is becoming going to be extinct. Now they are in the endangered state. There's Galapagos Island is there. There are so many species which are, having this kind of thing. So what could be the major change in the food that we can have as a substitution, and that we from this age, the next generation, to think about it?
I think the like Charles Darwin has always said survival of the fittest. I think we as a species also will start naturally adapting to the changing external environment, and that will have implications on our food. For instance, we already know that we have a lot of plastic in our bloodstream. By some means or the other, it has we have got it in, right? And newborn babies and children have much more percentage of it. So while it will have implications on health, our scientists, our medical practitioners are already finding solutions for it, so that innovation, inventions will keep happening. At the same time, I think our body will also keep coping with these changes. But um, like I said earlier, instead of just thinking about a substitute for milk, and instead of creating a whole industry, like for instance the electronic vehicles, right? It's not easy to replace all petrol vehicles and just think about a substitute. What do you do with those batteries in the long term? And how is that going to create larger waste? So it's not something as simple as, okay, milk is not going to be available, so let's replace it with this tetra pack of protein supplement. It's not going to help like that. We have to think much more deeply on what are going to be the implications of manufacturing something like this. Is it sustainable long term? What impact can it have on our health? And we have to be much more mindful in the choices we make about our food, and also be careful about what the pharmaceutical industry or what the health practitioners are saying, and read between the lines before really adapting or assimilating something into our bodies, because it's again something that one has to be careful in terms of understanding through the media's framing of it, and be mindful about that as well. So communication becomes so critical here, because it's uncertainty, there is risk involved, and at the end of it, it's going to impact human lives, right? And that makes the stake even higher. So one has to be really like what you're saying, you're reading it with your son, you're reading it in his the choice of media that he's reading. If it's coming in that newspaper that is the student edition, then it obviously has implications for him, and he's going to be discussing it with you. But when he's discussing it with you, you have to have your perception, because you have different other sources, whether you are reading a much more advanced medical journal about it, or you are reading something that he doesn't have access to it, and then you discuss it with him and communicate about it. So he is now fed with much more information, right? An algorithm or some newspapers not deciding for him that this is the best choice. And that is very important, to have a diverse opinion, to discuss it with different sets of people and get different points of view, so at the end of it you frame or you form your own opinion, and that's the way forward according to me.
I just have a follow-up question. See, today we call Bhutan is a carbon zero economy. That is possible because they have restricted few inhabitants staying over there. But for us, the highest populated country in the world, that's a real time challenge. So what we are facing, and again substitution at the same point of time with all these e-cars is not again a easy job. Therefore we need to work a lot, and therefore we need to do it. Now in this case, the media house is working as an instrumental tool in order to sensitize people. That is all said and done, but even then common mass is not much aware of. They are consciously or unconsciously not seriously taking the effects of climate change. So, do you feel what should be the further more concentrated effort to be taken at a government level, at a national level, keeping in mind our political trauma or drama, as we call? Then what should it be, as of India is concerned?
Right, very a good question, because like I said, if it doesn't have implications for me, why should I read it? What's in it for me? That question is going to come in my mind. So when we talk about climate change, it's always happened that it's happening somewhere else. It has no implication for you and me, but unless it affects me, then I start thinking about it. So when we think about policy level decisions and how it can have an implication on me, we are seeing a lot of it. Whether you are, like I said, constructing a house, you have to show that you are also thinking about a solar water heater system, or recharging your underground water through rainwater harvesting. If you are investing in a company, then you have to show that the ESG factor is taken care of, right? So in everything that we do from now on, there will be that one or two clauses that you have to look out for, which shows the implications that you will show towards your natural resources or conserving your natural resources. And that's how the policy is getting penetrated, or is getting ingrained into the mindset. And that mindset will take a long time to change, because I always give this example that we are a growing country. Every family wants to have 2 cars, 3 cars, wants to have 2 homes, 3 homes. And we are not going to be sticking to the Western concept of, okay, we've done that, we've achieved everything, now we want to become we want to give up everything, and we want to kind of go with nature. Everyone has to live their phase, and we are in a phase where we've not yet reached that stage that Western countries have reached. So it's very difficult to tell the population in our country that don't buy your second car, or don't buy your second house, right? Or don't go on a vacation, or don't fly so many times, because that's how we measure success. So the mindset and the culture is that way, that we measure success because we have so many houses, so many cars, we fly so many times. And that's the way in which it has been ingrained. So it's very difficult to communicate or convey that, and therefore we have to I'm not saying we have to live through it, but we have to bring in these policy instruments in a way in which it kind of pinches you now and then you start recalibrating and thinking that, no, maybe I should think twice before going for this. And that's how the policy should be changing now and then. For instance, we have a lot in terms of in urban cities, smart cities. There's a lot that's happening in that space, but then we also have tier 2, tier 3 cities, which are burgeoning with, different kind of population that have their own preferences, that are very what's the word they want to achieve a success, and for them success is calculated in such measures. So that's the conundrum that a country like ours is facing.
So minimalistic life, scientific and minimalistic, we can say.
Versus aspirational, that's the word I was looking for. Versus aspirational. So how do I define aspirational? And these are my measurements to define aspirational.
So I have one last question from my side. So now the situations we also have seen that many call for papers also when we are writing, ma'am, we have seen like this climate change is leading to some mental health effects. So if you feel that it's not being taken at a serious note, so what tentatively could be the percentage of the population at a global level or at our national level would be impacted by that neurocognitive syndromes as we are finding today?
Yeah, there's this concept of eco grief. It's called eco grief. And when I speak to young people, 16-year-olds or 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds, they are very sensitive towards this issue. And they are very, kind of uh, they have this mindset where they are saying that you are handing us over a planet that's beyond repair, so what do we do about it, right? And they shouldn't get into that concept of eco grief. It shouldn't affect them. So again, media is responsible for that because of the way in which they are portraying a disaster narrative. So they have to think about more climate solution oriented narrative. Or a lot of youngsters today are taking through their own social media platforms. They are creating podcasts, they're creating green job portals, they're creating their own voices, to talk about these issues, which is very interesting. In fact, every COP summit, a young person opens the COP summit. Last time it was a Pacific Islander. She talked about climate leadership, how she has done that in her island. So every COP summit, they invite somebody who's a youth representative. Why? Because they are going to be taking on the bastions from us. So we need to help them to transition, whether it is in terms of the knowledge systems that we've kind of created, or whether it is in terms of trying to tell them that don't see the entire thing as a doomsday kind of scenario. This is how we could help you. But they have different type of coping skills, and the coping mechanisms are very different because they are being fed with a multi-narrative kind of situation, unlike our generation, where we had one newspaper, we had one preferred news channel, or a set of people whom we would rely on for information. Today's young people have a diverse set of voices affecting their decision making process, and therefore it's very it could be very kind of what's the word, they could feel that there is no way that they can come out of this, and it's very overwhelming for them. And therefore, because of that overwhelming nature of it, they are not able to find a release of that. How do they release it? How do they release that tension? So what they do is then maybe they create, kind of release that tension through cognitive, like what you said, cognitive ways, by sharing more information on social media, by resharing an opinion piece and saying that this is my view, this is what somebody I know talks about it, or a music album that talks about climate change, they may listen to it more. So they want to release those tension needs that they have because of this overwhelming nature of this issue. And so the more we start thinking about giving them, through our syllabus, through our curriculum, through engaging projects that we do in our curriculum, the more we start giving them things that they can do something about with that energy, then they are going to be able to understand that these are the ways to find solutions. This is how resilience can be built, because the narrative is so overpowering for them. But that needs to be channelized in a proper way for them, so that they know how to deal with that situation. And that's where changes in curriculum, changes in job patterns are going to emerge for the young people to kind of start learning how to cope with them. They need to shift out of that traditional mindset that these were jobs that traditionally did well and I'm going to go in for those jobs. Now with climate change, they need to think about different kind of jobs, different approaches towards finding problems to a solution, because of the nature of what's happening in the external environment and the implications that policy changes will be bringing about.
Okay. So in addition to what ma'am asked, each of us as an academician, we are specialization in different various field like marketing or different things, right, ma'am? Now, how do we identify research topics, especially in climate area and climate change area?
Interestingly, you should also look at what your government is funding in terms of research grants, because, for instance, a lot of call for applications comes from the government and different departments on grants that they make available, and they bring about new themes. For instance, renewable energy, or shift in mindsets, the behavioral aspects. We had that call for neeti life ideas in terms of that. So interestingly, that should start as a starting point for you, but you also look out for different journals that you target and their special call for journals where they always come up with a theme that is connected to climate change and sustainability, and that can give you ideas for collaboration, that can give you ideas for looking at that interlinkages between topics. Because journals today, most of the top journals are aware of this nature of this problem, and they are also coming up with special issues about this theme. So look out for those special issues. And also, most of the conferences today are revolving around the theme of sustainability, climate change, responsible businesses, financial risks. So these are topics that most conferences come up with. And when you go into the agenda item for these conferences, you will see how nicely the themes are being extrapolated. And each of those themes and sub themes are again going to serve you as great research ideas, a great starting point for you to think about how you want to, link your body of research to what's happening or what everybody is doing in different parts of the world.
Yeah, ma'am, I was just going through your profile and I have seen that you are a hardcore journalist at one point of time. So, taking all those knowledge and then you started, or rather switched to your career towards an academician. This is wonderfully, first of all, we should appreciate that you have translated the entire world where you have a lot of knowledge into the books and which is coming to us in the form of an awareness. What is that triggered you to switch off this career right from the journalism to the academics, which is a switch for you, and of course it's a gainful situation for many of us. What triggered you?
Thank you for that perspective. I never thought about it like that. My primary motive was to reach out to more and more young people, because when I started teaching just as a guest faculty, I started feeling that there was a great disconnect between what we in the media, what we saw the world to be, and what the youngsters perceived it to be. And I wondered why the disconnect came, because was it a communication problem? Because as a journalist, we were exposed to so many different things, and the way the world was changing was phenomenal, and every day was new, every day was different. But unfortunately, our young people were trapped in their classrooms in a curriculum that didn't give them an iota of that experience that was happening outside in the real world. And that's when I started and enjoyed teaching and interacting with young people. And the way in which I kind of was able to showcase these case studies to them also showed that they were very fast and very adaptable to that, perceiving that knowledge, and also being very receptive to interacting with me. And that's how I started my journey into academia, by being as a guest faculty, going and doing one or two sessions, then developing my whole course, and disseminating it. And the reason I like teaching is because here's an opportunity for you to enthuse and engage with young minds of this country, because they are the future. And if you just give them, and you have students coming back to you after 5-6 years and saying, ma'am, remember you said this sentence and that struck me, and I was able to utilize it in my career, and I really got a promotion, or I got a good pat on my back for that. And then you realize the impact that you're having in the classroom, because they are at a stage where they are seeking that direction, that guidance, and that will pay off in phenomenal ways for them later in their career. So when you see those that impact, when you see that feedback coming from students, it's very heartening and also very humbling, because then you realize how important or how seriously you have to prepare, read up before you go to class, because of the nature of the interactions that can take place and the way lives can change. Yeah.
I think this is your non-verbal communication from journalism to academics. I would like to sum up in that way, because as you have communicated so many things about climate change, also brought that into the picture. And It's really thank you so much for being a part of these academic book talk.
Ma'am, but there is a lot of personal questions too. See, you as an environmentalist who tries to do all this. How do you personally manage your personal life as well as this professional life?
In terms of the choices I make in
Yes.
on the environment, yeah, that's a very good question. So I'm much more mindful about those choices that I make now, because I need to be walking the talk too, right? So in terms of like consumer choices, in terms of something, I stopped doing something very simple, and that was ordering a large number of packages, things that I didn't need. So I wanted to start by reducing the waste that was being generated in my home, whether it was a wet waste or dry waste, because I realized when we were young, or when our grandparents lived in the countryside, they would almost often generate waste that was recyclable, or they didn't have to have someone come and collect that waste, right? So live lightly on the planet is my motto. If you are just waiting for the garbage truck to come and generating a whole lot of like 2 drums of waste, then you are being a burden on the planet. So start by minimizing the amount of waste that you are generating in your own household. And I think charity begins at home. So I'm starting with that aspect, and I have been able to at least reduce the packages coming inside, in terms of ordering things that, in terms of my preference also as a consumer, right? If I didn't need this so many years ago, why do I need it now? So just because I have some click button that I can click, why should I be ordering it? So things like that I've been very mindful of. But two things need to reduce. I think I'd be very candid about it since you asked about it. One is consciously reducing, the flying on an aeroplane, because that's something that is very detrimental to our planet. The number of hours we fly on an airplane. So trying to consciously reduce that, but at the same time, I want my message to reach out to a larger audience. And when you get called to different places and you interact with different people, and then you hear different perspectives, so I'm trying to reduce that to 1 or 2 times a year. And that's again a conscious decision to reduce flying hours, because that can be very detrimental to the planet. And of course, food choices as well.
So, as we are understanding that you were an erstwhile journalist and now an academician and a writer, so there are multiple dimensions that you are in. So, you have to read, then research, and write. Three things you have to leverage. So, when and how do you manage to do that in a given spectrum of time with too much of commitments, maybe on the professional front, and then again, of course, at the personal front?
Yeah, it is challenging, because as a writer, you also need to understand people, you need to observe people, and you need to understand the pulse of society, right? So that's why I like traveling, because I'm always kind of observing, what different societies think, how people live, what is their perception, and trying to connect everything, right? So you can't, as a writer, you can't write for yourself. You have to write for an audience. And if that audience doesn't connect with your work, then it just doesn't help to write, because I'm doing it for a mass scale. So therefore, it's important to find that space. And if you want to do something, you're passionate about something, I think you will find and carve out the time for that.
All right. All right, ma'am. So we come to the end of the session. So as far as we have seen, so Dr. Deepti has given her voice to the world through her book, as well as her voice have reached in the music industry, environmentalist, media, academics, and across the countries. A few things that I have also noticed through your conversation, you have said public should respond, and communities should take care of the notice and initiatives. It's not only about the scientist or physicist who has to be worried about, it's us. So this requires a direction of public policy, increase in the biodiversity, communicate to the non-accessible like farmers or primary producer, a common man. So this media coverage really matters. Um, Also, one very interesting thing that you have brought in is the theme of having the old talking to the young. um, so that itself is very very fascinating to see. I mean, in your video also. So we have Dr. Deepti Ganapathy with us, and she has shared her wealth of experience, wealth of knowledge, wealth of advices to the young generation. So she mentioned very very few things. Live life lightly. Charity begins at home. Changes you and changes us. So, ma'am, on behalf of Christ University Management and also School of Commerce, Accountancy and Finance. So we thank you so much for joining us and giving your wealth to us. So this is Dr. Nabanita and this is Professor Dinesh. And we request you to show your book if you have a piece in so that our viewers can see it.
Yeah.
It's not visible, ma'am. Can you bring it in front of
Is
it?
it clear?
So this is my book, and this is a picture of me speaking to the tribal communities in the Western Ghats, and then these are the snapshots of the newspaper um, that I analyzed, and this is a view of the Western Ghats. So I kind of wanted the cover page of the South Asian edition to capture what I did there. The green cover page is of the global edition, the US UK edition, but this is the South Asian edition, which
Yeah, maybe, ma'am, since it is blurred screen, the
Yeah.
cover page of, yeah,
Yes,
now
this
it
is
is
fine.
fine. This
This
is
is fine.
fine.
This is
it's
Yeah,
fine.
this is looking fine. Yes.
yeah, it's visible.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that was how the book came across, and thank you so much, Professor Dinesh and Dr. Nabanita, because I've had a lot of talks, but nobody really asked me about my personal choices, and you got me to commit in a recorded conversation, and it's like showing me the mirror, right? And I was able to uh, you know I have committed, but I was able to do it in a public forum, and that's something that's very very empowering for me to feel that I've been able to achieve it. So why can't millions of people also be able to do it, and think much more deeply about our planet, and last but not the least, just leave it in a better place for our future generation, because we owe it to them. We don't want them to feel that they are inheriting a planet that is beyond repair. It's a beautiful place to live, and we have so many other living beings apart from human beings that inhabited this planet. Let's care much more about them. This is a great opportunity. We are standing at a time and a moment where we have a great opportunity to bring about a transformation in the way in which we come up with climate solutions and climate action. This is the moment for us. We need to do something in these times. So thank you very much. It has been a pleasure talking with both of you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And we'd like to thank Professor Rishikesh, who is heading this YouTube channel too. And thank all the subscribers of our YouTube channel for listening to us. And ma'am, we'll be happy and proud to invite you in the campus
Future talk.
because the young generation whom you want to address is right here. So we would like to invite you and create the ripple effect that you are trying to create in the globe. Please do come and talk to our students once.
Definitely. Like you said, non-verbal is very high in a personal interaction, and we need to find that space and the time to have that interaction face to face with all your students. I definitely like to do that sometime.
Yes.
Thank
So
you so
thank you
much.
so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.